I spent my life collecting images of a future that might never exist. Lace dresses saved in digital folders, bouquets pinned to my favorites, songs for the entrance, the toast, the first dance. Since I was a girl, I was fed the idea that true love is measured by the grandeur of the ceremony. The more people crying in the church pews, the more certain the promise. I grew up believing the party was the prize, the pinnacle, the public consecration of a well-lived fairy tale. And I prepared for it with discipline. I dated the right man, planned the dream event, met every expectation as if checking boxes in an invisible manual. But deep down, there was a silence within me that even the best wedding playlist couldn't drown out. There was a lack of spark in his eyes that no sunlit pre-wedding photos could illuminate. And no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, something in me whispered, "This isn't love, it's a performance." In the days leading up to what was supposed to be the most important moment of my life, I woke with a tightness in my chest that no makeup could conceal. Every detail that once excited me, the invitations, the tastings, the flowers, began to feel like chains. My fiancé, always so polished, so courteous, so perfect, didn't notice. And maybe he didn't want to. He loved the image we'd built, together, the magazine cover couple everyone admired, but he never cared to know what lay behind my flawless smile. And I was getting used to suffocating. Until one day, less than a month before the wedding, I sat alone in my car, still, clutching the dress from the final fitting and cried. I cried not out of fear of losing what lay ahead, but for betraying myself along the way. I cried because I realized I was about to enter something that had everything except truth. And there, in that stifling leather seat, with smudged eyes and a heavy heart, I knew. Either I turned back or I'd spend the rest of my life living a decorated lie. I canceled everything the next day. No prior warning, no detailed explanations, just a direct, no-nonsense message to everyone involved. The wedding planner was speechless. My mother cried, then yelled, then went silent for days. My father looked at me as if I'd committed a crime against the Rowen family tradition. And my fiancé, or rather ex, didn't even bother to see me in person. He sent a curt message, as if I'd caused him a mere scheduling inconvenience, not a wound. But the truth? I didn't feel guilt. For the first time, what I felt was relief, a relief so profound it let me sleep for hours, as if my entire body was resting from years of having to seem perfect for everyone, except myself. Weeks of silence followed. I fled the city for a while. I took just a small suitcase and left behind the heels, the dresses, the obligations. I picked a random place on the map, a small town where no one knew my name. I just wanted to hear my own breathing without the noise of others' judgment. And it was in that off-kilter time, in that gap between who I'd been and who I wanted to discover in myself, that I met the man who was never in my plans. He was the opposite of everything I'd imagined. No rehearsed promises, no famous last name, no six-figure bank account, but he had a gaze that listened before I even spoke, and a presence so whole, so real, that my weary soul found shelter without asking permission. At first I resisted, not because I didn't feel, but because I was still tethered to the idea that true love had to come wrapped in luxury, announcements, and validation. But he didn't push me. He just walked beside me day after day with a lightness that disarmed me. He cooked for me, listened patiently to my stories of the past, laughed at my quirks, and made me feel beautiful even with my hair tied up and an old t-shirt. For the first time, I didn't need a party to feel celebrated, and yet there was still something in me that couldn't fully let go. The shadow of what I'd idealized still lingered, as if true love was only real when there were witnesses, flowers, and a sparkling ring. It was on an ordinary afternoon, one of those when the sun feels calmer and time moves slower, that he looked at me differently. We were sitting on the porch floor, sharing the last slice of pie and talking about nothing, one of those aimless conversations that warm you from the inside. And mid-sentence, he stopped. He looked into my eyes, took a deep breath, and said, "Would you marry me? No party, no dress, no one else. Just you and me. Tomorrow if you want." My heart stopped for a second, not from shock, but because in that moment everything I believed about love came crashing down. There was no ring, no rehearsed speech, just that look, just that peace, just that man, whole, real, there. I stayed, silent, a silence that years ago would have been filled with a flood of doubts, guest lists, budget spreadsheets, and the endless need for external approval. But in that moment, all I could hear was the sound of the breeze, the smell of the old wooden porch, and the warmth of his hand holding mine gently. I thought of all the images I'd saved since I was a girl. The bridal march, rose petals on the aisle, friends crying in the front row. I thought of how all of that now felt distant, unreal, false. Because none of it would make me happier than that simple question, asked without pomp but laden with truth. So I looked at him and whispered, "Yes, and that's how love won. No dress, no altar, no one else. Just the two of us with a piece of sky as our witness." The next day, I woke before the sun, my heart calm and my body light, as if I'd finally shed a weight I'd carried since adolescence. There was a cup of coffee waiting for me on the table, and beside it a flower, plucked from the neighbor's garden, no bouquet, no ribbon, no card. But it was the most beautiful gesture I'd ever received. There was no white dress. I wore something simple, the kind I'd wear on our lazy Sundays, and yet I felt whole. In his eyes, there was no doubt, and in mine, for the first time, there wasn't either. We married in silence, just the two of us as promised. He spoke the most honest words I'd ever heard, and I answered with a steady voice, knowing that even without an audience, this was the truest moment of my life. For weeks, we didn't tell anyone, not out of shame, but because we felt no need to announce what was already so solid between us. Every day lived was a confirmation of our pact. Love doesn't need noise. We lived with the lightness of those who choose with their hearts. We split bills, chores, fears, and joys. The routine others might call simple was, for us, our home. Laughter in the kitchen, notes stuck to the fridge, walks at dusk. No filter, no mask, no effort, just presence. And that presence healed every frustrated expectation from the past. But like any heart once conditioned to crave others' validation, mine still harbored shadows. One day my mother called. She wanted to know how the preparations for the big day were going. As a distant cousin had mentioned, I'd been seen too happy with another man. I hesitated. For a second, I fell back into the role of the daughter who needs to explain, who needs to follow the script. I almost made up an excuse. I almost said we were planning something more traditional for the future. But I breathed, and I chose to tell the truth. I said I was already married, that it was just him and me, that there was no party, no dress, no guests, and that it was the most beautiful day of my life. The silence on the other end was long. Then came disappointment disguised as frustration. Words like selfishness, disrespect, childishness. But this time, I didn't cry. I didn't bend, and I didn't apologize. Because the love I'd built didn't need anyone's approval to be real. With time, reactions came from all sides. Friends who claimed to be close drifted away. Some reappeared only to leave pointed remarks. "You deserved more. I can't believe you gave up everything like that." won't you regret it later? As if love had anything to do with scenery and not essence. Aunts sent long, unsolicited advice via text. Even those who'd never cared about my life seemed offended that I'd married without putting on a show. And though I stood firm, it was impossible not to feel the small cracks this caused. Because as secure as I was in my choice, social isolation took its toll. It was like rowing against an invisible tide that told me day after day that what I'd lived wasn't enough to be celebrated. At home, he noticed. He didn't say much. He was never one for grand speeches. But he watched me with the kind of attention only someone who truly loves can have. And one late afternoon, after a particularly painful call with my mother, he brought me a slice of cake and said, with utter simplicity, "We may not have had a party, but we can have celebrations every day if you want." That undid me, not the gesture, but the raw truth in his words. He wasn't trying to convince me we'd done the right thing. He wanted to walk with me however it looked, for as long as it lasted. And in that moment I understood. I didn't miss the party. I missed permission to be happy my way. That's when I began to change. I stopped trying to explain our choice. I stopped justifying the absence of a white dress or a perfect photo album. I started responding with silence, with smiles, with presence. Because I realized that those who need a stage to love probably don't understand what love is. And that the real marriage didn't begin the day we said yes, but in the first coffee, shared in silence, the first knowing glance during a silly problem, the first night we fell asleep, upset but still holding hands. The world might not understand. But we did, and that was enough. The confirmation of what we'd built came when life truly tested us, not with harsh words or family judgments, but with something no one controls: uncertainty. He lost his job unexpectedly. It wasn't dramatic or announced with sirens. He just came home one day quieter than usual, sat on the edge of the bed and said, "It's over." They shut everything down. And in that moment I realized how much we'd changed, because my reaction wasn't fear or despair or that theatrical worry I'd seen in relationships where appearances mattered more than support. I simply sat beside him, rested my head on his shoulder and said, "We'll get through this together." And we did. We cut expenses, adjusted plans, lived with less and, paradoxically, with so much more. More time, more truth, more presence. I'll never forget the day we celebrated our first wedding anniversary with an improvised candlelit dinner. Not out of romance, but because the power was out. And yet we laughed so much that night it was impossible not to see. This was happiness. This was the celebration. No lavish hall with 100 guests could compete with that cramped room, where two hearts beat in sync amid challenges that only strengthened what was already strong. When things started to improve, and yes, they did, we felt no need to make up for what we hadn't had. There was no belated party, no rented outfits for a photo shoot, because what we lived was so real, so profound, that any attempt to embellish it would seem small compared to the grandeur of what we'd built with effort, sacrifice, and love. And in that moment I understood, without a shred of doubt, love had won. Not at the altar, not under spotlights, but here, in the middle of real life, on the floor of a simple house, in the hand that never let go of mine, in the silence that was never empty. With time, the questions stopped. The demands did too. The people who once seemed so offended by my choice commented less and less, as if they'd finally accepted there'd be no change of plans, no late regret. And in the silence that remained, I found a kind of peace I'd never known when I lived trying to meet everyone's expectations. That's when our life, mine and his, truly began. No interruptions, no explanations. Just us, day after day, learning to inhabit the same space with lightness, with listening, with care. We created small rituals that didn't appear in any etiquette book. Things like making coffee for each other without asking, lying together to listen to the rain, leaving simple notes on the mirror. I, who once thought love was measured by the grandeur of its proofs, began to see that it lives in the small, imperceptible details, only visible to those inside it, and that realization transformed me from the inside out. Because I wasn't just married, I was whole. No spotlight, no makeup, but whole. A letter arrived on an ordinary morning, one of those when life follows its serene, predictable rhythm, and still surprises you with a gesture that turns everything upside down, not for its drama, but for its sweetness. It was on the table, carefully folded next to my coffee mug. I recognized his handwriting immediately, firm, slanted, with that stroke that always seemed to belong to someone who says little but feels much. I opened it slowly as if unwrapping something precious. The words were few, but they carried a weight beyond the paper. You taught me that living is simple when you stop pretending. Thank you for showing me that and for keep choosing us. I read and reread those lines so many times I could recite them by heart, and there, with misty eyes, I understood how far we'd come, how much we'd grown together. There were no flowers, no applause, no background music, but inside me, something ignited. It was the kind of acknowledgement no wedding party could have expressed. It was the quiet confirmation that even without the world seeing what we built was real, unbreakable, and profound. Today, looking back, I don't see absence. I see choice. Every moment lived outside the standards that once confined me was a declaration of freedom I made for myself. The wedding the world didn't see, I lived intensely in every gesture, every shared morning, every comfortable silence. There's no album, no gift registry, no keepsakes printed with our names in gold. But there's a living memory, pulsing in me every time he holds my hand during a mundane conversation or covers me at night without me asking. I no longer feel the need to explain or defend our story, because it stands on its own, strong as ancient roots, deep as a promise made without words. And so, without spotlights, without an audience, without witnesses, love won. It didn't need a stage. It only needed us, and our yes, spoken softly, but felt with our whole beings. Years have passed, and time has taken care to mark our skin gently, as if slowly carving each wrinkle with good memories. Today, watching him water the plants in the yard with grayer hair and the same serene eyes as always, I feel a peace that words can't hold. Our home remains modest, made of simple details and quiet affection. We still share coffee every morning, and every now and then he leaves a flower on my mug like he did in the beginning. We never had a wedding album, but we have drawers full of notes, candid photos, and memories stitched together by daily life. And whenever someone asks if I regret not having a big party, I smile. Because deep down, we had what many never do, a whole love lived with truth, without witnesses, but with everything that matters.